everyone. My name is Jennifer Wallinga, and I'm a professor in the School of Communication and Culture at Royal Roads University. Welcome to our episode 22 and a half. It's a bonus reel that comes in the middle of a couple of episodes around social impact and community sport. And I'm excited to have Dr. Laura Meisner and Dr. David Legg joining me today. We'll have a conversation around events and in particular Paralympic events or parasport events and the social impact that these bring to our experience in sport. This is part of the Sport Leadership and Social Change series, and we've been running this for a couple of years now, and excited to keep the conversation going. I always want to start by acknowledging that I come to you from the lands of the Lekwungen and Kusepsin people, also known as Songhees and Esquimalt First Nation communities. And we always want to acknowledge the gaps in our histories and the loss of the learning that we then suffered in not acknowledging that these are the people who came before us, and we have much to learn. At Royal Roads, we are on unceded territory, and we are very devoted, committed to working with our Indigenous neighbors and partners in trying to restore balance to our culture and the learning that we're offering here on these lands. It's crucial within our model at Royal Roads that we learn from the land, the ecological models, and the principles that these offer to us. We try to weave these into any programs, not just the environmental programs, but leadership, communication, human security, and peace building. We look to nature for metaphors like these, the idea that diversity, of course, is what we hinge on. Our survival hinges on diversity, our learning and development and growth. We in our school lean on the idea of a bridge of how do we link difference. It starts with acknowledging diversity. I find in sport, we learn this principle early, that a team is comprised of diverse members, and it's about embracing that diversity and leveraging the differences that help us to achieve true synergy and those Gestalt principles of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. At our university, we also uphold other concepts such as application and authenticity, caring and community-based learning models, and all geared toward transformation, positive transformation in society, but personal transformation as well. And when we go through that life-changing experience, we're better equipped to support transformation in others. This webinar series really focuses on sport, and I love sport. I think it's a microcosm of the world in many ways, but also offers a blueprint for positive social interaction. The principles that we learn through sport, the truths that exist or are held within sport offer us so many opportunities and positive concepts that we can lean on as we try to work through the challenges we face in our society. We've seen sport play a huge role in our society as well. It's offered people who participate, and you can participate in sport in so many different ways, not just as an athlete, but it offers us such a great platform for expression and expressing, the things that matter most to us. Our programs try to align with some of the very similar principles that I think sport upholds, like development and diversity, education, the importance of the environment and its sustainability, equity, human rights, health, communication, and peace. And we've tried very hard to partner with a number of sport organizations, but we also find that our model of prior learning and acknowledging the professional learning that you gain in a variety of contexts, not just the academic context, we acknowledge that for credit, and we do the same for professional athletes, elite athletes. We've also partnered with some organizations like Game Plan, which prepares athletes for their career post-sport, and also working with organizations like the CFL Players Association to offer programs in leadership development. This episode will be exploring the impact of sport, the social impact of sport. And we often think that when you host an event, for instance, that it will bring all sorts of energy and positive values to the community in which it's operating. And I think it has the potential for that, like anything in sport. But we're also learning that we need to intervene or support or facilitate that kind of learning and impact. What are the positive social outcomes of parasport is another topic we really want to delve into today. And I welcome two guests. My first is Laura Meisner. She's at Western University, a director and professor in the School of Kinesiology. She researches how sport and events can be used as instruments for social change. And she's also a recent award winner of the Joy DeCensi Diversity Award for Inclusive Excellence at the North American Society for Sport Management. I also welcome Dr. David Legge. He's a professor of sport management at Mount Royal University in Alberta. And he also participates in a cool podcast I want to highlight and promote. We've Solved Nothing, the Sport Calgary podcast, worth checking out on Apple and other podcasting networks. And he's also the past president of the Canadian Paralympic Committee. And those are just a few of insights into our two guests. I always start by offering them an opportunity to share more about their love of sport and why they remain in sport. And we'll kick off with that most certainly. And we'll get into our conversation shortly, but I just want to highlight as well that there's some contact information here and ways to follow our guests online. And I want to highlight our next episode 24, which is Young Leaders Championing Values-Based Sport. And these are a group of, I call them my cats, really. They're a research assistant team that are just fabulous women doing great work in the area of sport and running in all directions. So we'll have a great chat with them in March 22nd, same time, same place. All right, so let's get rolling with my wonderful guests. We have David Legge and Laura Meisner. And I always like to start by just asking you to give us a little bit more background on what drew you, what was your journey into sport? Why are you still here? What is it about sport that keeps you connected, keeps you focused on it? Who would like to start?
I can go. I had to think about this one, Jennifer. It was an interesting question because as a kid, I was obviously heavily involved in sport. I was drawn into gymnastics, and I was an athlete for quite a long time. And I was an athlete that during the generation in the 80s where you trained 30 to 40 hours a week, and I was in it a lot, and I loved it, and I had great experiences in it. And yet I actually quit gymnastics when I was about 13. So I was the typical athlete at that age in many respects. But then I tried to find every sport that under the sun. I tried everything, and I was terrible at everything else. So ironically, I actually went back to gymnastics in university and started a team at McMaster, and we had a club team that traveled and did all kinds of fun stuff. So when I got into research and started to think about research, I actually did some of my early research on gymnastics and wanted to understand a bit more about the culture of gymnastics and how we were actually creating an environment for safe opportunities for people to participate. And I think back about that because it's not that I had bad experiences, but I knew that it wasn't right. I knew there were things going on that just weren't right. And so I did that work with my master's, and I can honestly say I had to step away from it after because it was just so painful, the things that I heard, all the things that we're hearing about today. And that's 20 some years ago. That's what people were telling me. So I stepped away from it. Got involved in looking at mega events, which I thought was just completely outside my realm. I didn't know anything about it, but I loved it. It was so fascinating. And so it really kind of spoke to me about some ways that we could use those events to create cool opportunities. And so that's sort of the space that I've gotten into, and then got into the realm of disability sport. And ironically, David is a big influence on that. David's the one who called me up in advance of the 2010 Vancouver Games and said, I want you to come speak at this conference. And I said, why? And so I went and had a really great time and really realized actually a lot of what I was doing really resonated in the disability and parasport space. And so I've become really passionate about that, about how we can create safer, great opportunities for quality participation, and events are part of that. And we'll talk about that today. So I think that's, sort of a short history of how I got into this space and why I'm still working in this space.
Yeah, it's lovely. And I like how you describe how you have to walk away at some point. I mean, it's important work. Justice in sport is important work, but it's so debilitating. And so I find the same. I have to kind of step in and out and keep my focus on, well, what's the positive vision? What are we building instead of just kind of fighting against it? Wonderful. Thank you. And David, how about you? It's your journey.
I, I think for me, it was a connection to family and my community, which originally drew me in. And I was thinking about my own experiences as a youth playing sport. I'm not sure I loved it. And I wasn't particularly good at it. But my dad loved sport, and my dad had a disability. So my dad had multiple sclerosis, and he loved watching sports. So I watched sports with him, I think, more than anything else. And I knew he loved coming to my games. And I don't ever think there was a pressure that I felt to do it, but I liked the connection with him, and I liked the connection with my family. My mom loved going to the games for the socialization. She had very little understanding. I'll never forget a story about when I was playing high school basketball and I got a defensive rebound and she was yelling, "Shoot, David, shoot, shoot." And my dad was like, Barbara, he's shooting on the other net. It's the other way, the other end of the court. Anyways, but my mom loved to be like, so it was just kind of a family thing. And I played, a number of different sports. Again, none of them particularly well. And then I went to McMaster to do a physical education degree and thought that I wanted to be a physical education teacher. And in my third year, I took a course called Adapted Physical Activity. And I really didn't know much about the disability angle on physical education, sport, physical activity, and recreation. And it just kind of opened up. I was like, whoa, this is a thing. Like, this is something that I could actually do. And so the original plan was to be a high school physical education teacher, but focusing on children with impairments. And you know how things go. Sometimes doors open and you're suddenly made aware of other opportunities. And so when I went to do my master's at the University of Windsor in sport management, I decided to focus on the disability sport system. And again, my eyes were just open to an entire industry and system that I didn't know existed at all. And so I spent the whole summer driving around to different events throughout Ontario, trying to understand why people volunteered at these events as opposed to able-bodied sport events. And that was my master's thesis. That led to a job at the Ontario Wheelchair Sport Association, which led to a job at the Canadian Wheelchair Sport Association. And every step along the way, I was just like, oh, I had no idea that this was here. And so it was kind of every step along the way, this understanding of these really, really amazing people. And I think ultimately that's what's kept me in it, is the kindness and the generosity of the people. Like I don't really know how to describe it from a cultural perspective, and I don't know if it's that different because I don't really have a comparison point necessarily, but from my sense of it anecdotally is they're kind, they are generous, like they want to bring people in. They're not, they don't push people back and say, oh no, this is my turf, you can't step in here. Anyways, that's, I think, what's kept me in it since then. And so now, I guess I'm primarily, Laura talked about her research. I kind of dabble in research, I guess, more than anything else, but I'm probably more of a, people have used the term pracademic, and I would say that that's probably a good descriptor of me. And so I do a lot of grassroots programming now, on campus and in the Calgary area that relate to adapted physical activity. And I think that's where I probably derive my greatest pride and joy now. And that's what's kept me in it today.
And I see you nodding, Laura. Maybe you want to add more to that, around the culture of para sport or a disability sport. What is it that makes it a draw for you?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that David talks about the people. I mean, that's how I got into it, right? Because David is one of those people who really has driven those opportunities to make sure that there is good quality opportunities for people to participate. And I think it is one of the things that is so valuable about parasport is that people are really passionate about it and want to include others and want to get people involved in it. And there isn't necessarily the same stigma around the competitiveness and some of that we see in the non-disabled realm. And so the people that I've met throughout my journey in this space have just been outstanding and so welcoming and interested in what we're doing and how they can support it. And so I think that's the piece that's been really good for me and valuable. Then I've continued from a research perspective as well, that I just really like, it's great with the people. Like, I love working with everyone. So that's awesome. And David downplays his role in that, but I think that he has been a force for good in this country in terms of disability sport. And so I often think, oh gosh, what happens when David decides he doesn't want to do this stuff anymore? Who's gonna take on all these wonderful things? But at the same time, I think there are people that he's worked with and that we've worked with who are taking on these great roles, and I think the future of it looks really, really bright.
Well, I think an example of that is Sam Herron, who you mentioned earlier, right? I mean,
Exactly.
So she, to me, I didn't know the others necessarily as well as I know Sam, but I mean, Sam to me would be one of those people that's going to drive this moving forward. And the thing I think is relevant to this conversation is, like, I'm an outsider. I'm able-bodied. And so, as is Laura, I don't want to speak on behalf of Laura, it's been an interesting journey in that sense as an able-bodied person, but having an interest in an allyship, whatever the term is, but and being welcomed into that, and not being considered an outsider. At least I've never felt that way. I've never felt that was a sense. And if nothing else, again, just this sense of, yeah, you're one of us, you're part of us. Again, I don't have the lived experience, so I don't obviously fully appreciate or understand it, living with an impairment, but there's never been a sense to me where people have treated me as an outsider.
But I think that's important, David, because we come to this with a real recognition, a self-recognition of what our perspective is not of having that lived experience. And so, taking the time and the opportunity to really listen and hear for those who have that experience is so fundamental to what both of us do. So I think that's something that we probably both took away from our education. We have the same educational path, but that does speak to it. I mean, the people we worked with at Windsor, the people we worked with in Alberta, fundamentally in our research in our realm, it's about listening to those voices and hearing those voices. And I would say that's probably a critical piece of the conversation we're going to have today. That's not being done enough, is really listening and hearing those voices.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because of some of the issues we experience, the stigma, the barriers in sport, right, where we aren't listening as well as we should. It's become this cultural crux, I think. It was interesting. I'm looping back to that. My eyes were opened. I had no idea, right? So exposing, and Sam Herron is just such a promoter and advocate now because of the same. Disability sport embodies the values I think we're trying to build across the sport system. It's the perfect model, truly, isn't it, in so many ways. And so what else? So listening, what else could we be doing to be promoting these values? I mean, I think that is it. We feel a real alignment. Competition is understood in its true nature. Like, competition is collaborative. People don't get that. They want to destroy each other, and that's a problem in sport right now. But I find when I'm, and this is what Sam would talk about, that we really get it in disability sport, parasport. We really get this concept that it's collaborative. We're working together towards something. What else do you notice?
What's the Greek mythology where you're pushing the rock up the hill? Sisyphus? Is that?
Sisyphus, yeah.
Yes. And I think for a lot of people, they think that trying to make change through sport is a bit like that. Like, it's just this constant push, and maybe that's true. But I guess, and I'm probably going to mix a whole bunch of metaphors or analogies here in a second here, but it's the idea of kind of, hitting the rock, and eventually it's going to crack. And so it's all these little micro things that we do at the local level that I think ultimately are going to add up to something significant. And so when we run our wheelchair basketball program at Mount Royal, and this is just one small example, I really wanted it to be done in our triple gym, which everybody kind of sees, and they have the track around the top, and it's the one that's open, as opposed to the other gym, which was another option for us, which nobody ever goes to, and it's kind of hidden away. I wanted it to be out in the open. I wanted to normalize that people are playing wheelchair basketball in a community recreation center, and that's what we do. And so I think little things like that, encouraging, Mount Royal Cougar Athletics and Recreation to, when they are putting out promotional pieces on come to our fitness center, showing a person with an impairment in one of the pictures working out. And again, like maybe that's not to some people that big of a deal, but it is. I think these little micro changes that over time result in bigger societal evolution. And I think you're seeing that to some degrees on television commercials, as an example. And so with, the national partners that were with the Canadian Olympic Committee and the Canadian Paralympic Committee, going to your Toyota dealership and seeing the logos of the Canadian Olympic Committee and the Canadian Paralympic Committee side by side, I think significant. People are like, wonder what that is. And then that's what it is. And so then they see them as equals, they see them as equivalent. And that slowly chips away at the myths and the beliefs that a person with a disability can't be considered a high performance athlete. It's not that long ago. You think back to Chantal Petitclerc in 2004, when she won, and I'll probably get the numbers wrong a little bit here. I think she won 5 gold medals at the Athens Paralympic Games. I think she won 5 gold medals at the World Track and Field Championships that year. And she was the co-recipient of the Athlete of the Year with Perdita Felician, who won a bronze in the World Track and Field World Championships, which I'm not trying to diminish her accomplishments. I'm saying this, but, to compare apples to apples, 10 gold medals versus 1 bronze medal. If you just looked at the medals, that's not equivalent. And so, then you think, well, how many medals does a Paralympic athlete have to win in order to be the athlete of the year? And so that was 2004. So we're almost 20 years from that. And I think we're getting better. Every once in a while, you'll see a Paralympic athlete named as the athlete of the year in various jurisdictions. And so I think that's changing. I think that's evolving. The Canada Games, which are taking place right now, in Prince Edward Island, as we're talking, are having events for athletes with impairment, both for Special Olympians and for parasport, and they are treated as high performance sport. And I don't think they're looked as less than or different. They are just different. They're not just less than better. It's just a different sport. And I think that's happening slowly. So we're not perfect. We're not 100% there yet, but I think it's getting there.
But it is these insidious, kind of subtle hierarchies of value, right, that underpin a lot of our thinking. And we need to rip them out and expose it, because, it's the same with the Canadian women's soccer team, right? Where what does it take? What does it take for Cincy to be acknowledged in the world, right? Yeah. But there's this subtle, it doesn't, it's not as hard or something.
I would say that's a good analogy. I think women's sport is, again, not there yet, but it's getting there. And I think disability sport is on a similar trajectory. And, if I was to guess, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 years behind. But as, if you could see the trajectory of women's sport, if you look at the gist online, right, and they talk about the numbers of people watching women's basketball in the States, or I think University of Nebraska next year is going to try and break a record for the number of people watching a women's volleyball game or something like that. And they're going to host it in the big stadium. They're hoping for 85,000 people. So these things are happening. But I would say disability sport is just on a similar trajectory, but perhaps not quite as fast.
Yeah. I love hearing David's point of view, because it's always so idealistic too. Because then I come in and go, yeah, but I think you pointed it out, Jennifer, there's those microaggressions that just continue to happen, and these really tendencies towards the norm, right? Tendencies towards the center, tendencies towards ableism. And so that's just something that is going to take so much time, so much thought, so many ways to really break that down and highlight the problem with that, right? We have it in gender piece, and maybe that's a good analogy to talk about. Are we go to the norm when we talk about man, typically white male. When we talk about the norm, we talk about an able-bodied white male. And so until that really changes, and I don't see that changing anytime soon without us really highlighting the problems with that norm, that it's going to take a lot more than those small steps in programs. I would say in many respects, we're probably better at it sometimes at the grassroots level in the programs David's talking about, because we have champions like him and others in this province as well, focusing on making sure these are good, inclusive, opportunities. I think where we see some of the highlights of where the inequities really exist is when we start to talk about the high performance realm and the competitive sport realm, right? The inequity in financial resources, the inequity in terms of the opportunities for quality coaching, access to, training facilities and the resources that go along with it, all the things that we, should be on par, right, across the board, no matter whether we're talking about disability sport or able-bodied sport, should be on par, or there should be an equity. And we know that that's not there yet. It's great that the logos are side by side, but what does that mean to the athlete on the ground who's trying to work in this space? Are they getting the same opportunities and funding and resources and to excel and to be their best? And I don't think we're there yet. I think we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, and who's asking those questions? And I'm finding more and more in my own, just anecdotally and in my experience, that it really is coming from the youth. And so pointing to grassroots and it's the athletes calling for it, but we have to make sure if we're going to change norms, we got to make sure we're educating in a way that is going to grow those norms in a different way, right? So kids, a 12-year-old kid is going to be, well, of course, this is how it is now, right?
Right. Yeah. And certainly things are slowly changing. It's just so interesting when we start to talk about what happens, in my space, I talk about events, and we still have separate spaces where people can sit who use a chair, separate buses that are transportation for people. And I was speaking to an Olympic athlete recently who talked to me about this and said, I never got it when I was competing. I thought, what was the big deal? They were there competing, they got their medals, they did their own thing. And then I sit here and look at that row. That's for the athletes who use a wheelchair. That's separate from the rest of the team. We would never say, oh, that row is only reserved for the women, the Black men, but yet it seems to be acceptable that we enable that separation because it's a step forward. At least it's not as bad as it used to be. So, well, yeah, that's right. It might not be as bad as it used to be, but is it where it should be? Are we at the point of seeing equity and equality in those spaces? No, absolutely not. So we got a long way to go from that perspective.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just unconscious, right? We're so unconscious. We just kind of default to these things. I shared with David, a wonderful coach down at Arizona State, who's got a, and even that, why don't we have para programs across all our universities? Why is that the norm? But he says the same experience. I love it. How his kid from his wheelchair basketball team is going to receive their diploma. It needs to be the same, not some ramp up the back and some different path.
Oh, I just had experience with that with one of my PhD students. So let me tell you, that's happening at universities as well. And we're talking a Paralympic athlete who should be celebrated as they come across the stage getting their PhD, not the one that had to go up the back elevator to be able to come across and around the orchestra. And, so those kinds of things are still rampant in so many spaces as well.
Which links back to David's point about those artifacts. So requesting the gym, making sure the path is the same so that it's always visibly the same. And that can start impacting people's sense of what is normal as well, right? Yeah, which is the culture stuff, all those artifacts, but also the underlying assumptions and then the values, what we truly value. Okay, well, keep going.
And it's funny because I've been involved, I don't know, like arguably 30, 35 years or whatever it is in this industry. And I'm still talking about, we're not there yet. We're hosting, so Laura's flying out to Calgary later this week to attend a conference that I'm helping organize. And I forgot about podiums. And again, the typical standard podium for a person who is standing. And 2 of our 4 keynote speakers use wheelchairs. I'm just like, oh, geez, I totally forgot about this. And that's on me. And it's this unconscious, but because I don't have the lived experience, maybe that's part of it, right? Is I don't see it through that lens as dramatically or as in your face. And so I forgot. And again, I'm not proud of that by any stretch of the imagination. And hopefully, it keyed in some other things that I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta think about this. I gotta think about that. I gotta think about this. But again, those are little things that chip away. It's maybe not happening as fast as it should or could. But I'd like to think that these little things eventually add up to something big.
Absolutely.
Right. I think even more so, David, it's not that it's unconscious. It's not that it was upon you to make that decision about podiums. It's that the institutions are set up from an able-bodied perspective.
Yeah.
And that we have to remind them, actually, people come from different backgrounds, have different experiences, and right? So there's this institutionalized norm of ableism. That is really the piece we have to start to try and break down.
Well, and we're all at universities. So I teach my adaptive physical activity class. It's a third-year undergraduate course, about 100 students. So it's not a small course. And we don't have very many large lecture theaters on our campus. And the one that they always put me in is inaccessible. So I have to come in at the top and I have to go down a number of stairs to teach at a podium. And to the institution's credit, they have now made some changes whereby they are doing an accessibility audit of all the classrooms so that they'll understand which ones are and are not accessible, and people will be able to request those for that purpose. And any new classroom builds moving forward will ensure that they are accessible, and they've built a number of new classrooms which are exactly that. But as I'm teaching the class about accessibility, it's quite ironic as I'm telling students, well, what if I was a wheelchair user, I would be lecturing from the back, and I'd have to have somebody come down and change the slides for me or do whatever it needed. Or what if, as to Laura's point about people attending stadiums and events, if there's a student who used a wheelchair, and there have been a couple of instances where that's happened, they had to sit in the back, which may not be the best place to sit if you want to learn. And so, yeah, I mean, these things, like at universities, we're certainly, we need to look at ourselves as much as anybody else. And I know the three of us were, involved in an online conversation about university sport, and athletes and students with impairments, and why shouldn't they be allowed to be varsity athletes in a Canadian context? Why haven't we made that step yet? I don't know. Maybe we're just on the cusp. Maybe it's going to happen sooner than I think. But to me, that's an obvious change that could and should happen quickly.
Yeah, agreed. But I think it's interesting. Bring it back to sport a bit, Jennifer. This is the kind of thing where it really turns people off from being involved in participating in sport, because if they show up for something, they come to a program and they have this experience of, oh, I couldn't get in that door, or I didn't have the transportation, or there wasn't people like me there, then they're not going to want to continue to participate in sport. And so that's the really key piece that we have to have champions like David around to really point those things out and call the system to account, that we need to make sure that these experiences are quality experiences from the get-go. From day one, when somebody walks in the door or wheels in the door and says, this is a great program because they thought about me. And that's the part that I think we're still really working on. It's not easy, and there's a lot of complexities to it, but we need to be thinking about all the different opportunities. So, universal design for everything would be wonderful, but we're still not there yet.
But Parasport is sure playing a role in that, right? In awakening. And that's why I think it is absolutely the model for sport, in that you have to think about many, many things in order to that universal design concept, right? That can teach us so much. And even, and then back to the institutional norms, a podium even is crazy, really. Why are they tall? Why do we have a podium? Why are we expected to be the center of and stand behind this thing? And, it calls into question so many things at the same time. So as we're exploring universal design, it's also challenging some of these other very colonial norms, frankly, and imperialistic and paternalistic. Yeah. What else does it teach? What else does Parasport have to, can it teach us by championing disability sport? What else are we bringing to the forefront?
Well, it's interesting because obviously in this country right now, our big conversations are about safe sport. And I've been thinking so much about what do we really mean by safe sport? Certainly there are, the basic terminologies around free from harm, free from maltreatment. But to me, safe sport is so much bigger and more than that. And it is about safe and welcoming sport, right? When I come in and I participate, I should be able to be self-determining how I participate in that space, how I connect with others in that space, how I belong within that space. And when we can create sporting spaces and sporting opportunities that really facilitate that level of safety, that's when I think we're really making progress. And that's where the direction we should be going. So from that respect, Parasport actually started on that path long ago, because that's how it begun. Come on in. But yeah, of course you can participate. We'll figure out how it's going to work and the kinds of adaptations that have been made, and no problem, we'll figure it out, and people will help get you here, and we'll get you the right coaches, and right. So there's been all these kinds of adaptations to make sport safer and more welcoming and more inclusive. And so we can learn so much from that. Like if we could do that with all sport, we would be so much better off. And yet, again, you go back to the institutionalized understandings of sport. No, what sport is supposed to be in this box, and it's supposed to fit like this, and these are the rules, and you must follow it. And you don't change that. And yet the reality is, if we just change some of those things and really thought about more inclusive, welcoming, belonging, we probably have a much safer system.
That's a really good point in how parasport and adaptive physical activity, like other people can learn so much from examining it, and seeing how, they have done different things. So in my adaptive physical activity class, one of the projects is on innovation and entrepreneurship. And any company wants that in their staff or employees or their culture, right? This idea of, thinking differently, thinking outside the box, and, trying to come at things in a different way. Well, the disability culture, that's inherent in it, is constantly trying to adapt and adjust to an able-bodied context and be successful in it. And so this idea of being innovative, I would suspect, is not I don't want to have a sweeping generalization that all people with disabilities are these massive innovators, but I would think that, this idea of being innovative and creative is just kind of part of the experience, and trying to adapt and figure out, how do I get on the podium to accept my PhD when I can't walk up the stairs?
Yeah. I think back to one of the first studies, David, that after I had spent some time with you and I came back to London, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this great study on sledge hockey, at the time still called sledge hockey before it became para ice hockey. And I'm interviewing the athletes, and I'm thinking they're going to tell me how upset they are about all these things that are not accessible for them and how they do that. And instead, all I got was the stories of, well, it's better than when we were over in, these countries, and you have to lug your chair on the back here and then get this, and somebody else carries this, and they're telling you about all these things they did to adapt to just get to an event and be able to, play their match. And I'm thinking, okay, well, then nobody was upset about it. It's just the way it was, and that's the way it worked. And it was a really big eye opener for me to listen to those stories, because my expectation coming is, well, they should be really angry about having to do these things. And this is our reality. This is what we live with. And so we just innovate and adapt and find new ways to do stuff, and it works, and we have a great time over it. So I thought that was something that we really took away from those conversations, and really fueled my interest in pursuing this more and listening to those stories more.
Reminds me of the 1976 women's rowing team, who I always, admired. The first time women were allowed to row at the Olympics. And we, of course, come in and we're all like that, oh my God, you had so many barriers and I can't believe you weren't allowed. And they did not have that attitude at all. We were just so glad to be there. We were so happy to be included. And yeah. And also this attitude, but also this idea of creative problem solving. I went to listen to Warren McDonald once. He lost his legs, climbing accident, but he talked about trying to get to a speaking engagement. And there was one of those entryways like that, where it's and just, he had this picture of that. So here he is with his chair, like how the hell are we going to get through this thing with the chair, right? And his partner was like, we have this problem, but we can solve it. And of course, they figured out a way to do it because of the attitude and the creativity. But I think it's highly worth emphasizing this quality of parasport as well, right? The inclusion, the lack of discrimination, but also the creativity that we all need in sport. Yeah.
We were talking about, pushing for social change, and, some of the examples that we just talked about, the just happy to be there. And I sometimes struggle a bit with, I'd like to think I'm a nice guy. And I try to placate, I try to get along. And I sometimes wonder if that maybe has not been the right approach. And I don't think I'm going to change my stripes necessarily and become more militant. I just don't think that's
unlikely, David.
Unlikely.
I sometimes you look at social movements, right? And there hasn't really been a disability. There has been, but it has not been to the same level as, the Black Panther power salutes or, the racial riots in the 60s and those sort of things. And maybe disability needs to be a bit more, I might really regret saying this, almost angry and just like, okay, this is not okay.
Right. Yeah, I would tend to agree, David. And I think I listen to my students with disabilities talk about that. How come there is these new committees on our campuses that focus on, different groups who have been racialized or right? And I've been here and my family's been here and my friends with disabilities, we've been here and this is still happening to us. And yet nobody seems to be paying attention. So you're right. I do think there is some level there needs to be not angry, but more upheaval over this ableist world that we live in, right? We need to be thinking more about why is that acceptable? Why are we continuing to be so accepting of that? And yet we're not accepting of a lot of the other things that are going on that discriminate against people. So yeah.
Rise up. Let's do it. Okay. And assertive, right? I think
Right.
it is so important. I think it's like, again, we're aligning it or paralleling it with the gender issues that we face, but there's that same kind of placating, well, we should just be grateful and just keep kind of moving forward slowly. But no, come on. It should be the way. There should be equity.
Yeah. Well, I see what's happening on, my campus in particular. This is the one that I know best as it relates to the decolonization, the indigenization of our curriculum and those sort of things. And again, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be doing that. But what I'd love to see too is that kind of focus and that kind of interest from a disability context too.
Mm-hmm.
Cross campus. And so again, I admire, and I don't know if admire is the right word. I think it's great that this is happening on our campus as it relates. Again, we haven't fixed it, we haven't finished, but I'd love to see the same path on our campus as it relates to disability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would absolutely 100% agree with that, David. And I've heard that a lot from, particularly from my students who have these experiences and say, well, hold on a second. Like, wait, why does it have to be the disability studies program that's the advocate for us? Right. Why is it not these major committees doing this major work that's happening across campus and other equity issues? So there needs to be some more upheaval. And that probably relates back to our issues around why isn't there disability or parasport at universities, right? I mean, again, I know why. I know there's lots of excuses. I'm going to call them excuses of why this is not happening, but it could be happening. But we need that push. There needs to be more voices that say that this isn't acceptable and we need to be having some equity of opportunity. It's great to see some new recreation parasport programs happening in some of the universities in Ontario, and that's a great pilot project that's happening. But that's still only small steps towards where we should be going in terms of equity of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So the cultural peeling back that we have to do here is, we've talked about the artifacts on the surface, and that's a really great lever for change because people start to see and they question their norms, and it's important. So requesting that gym and making sure the podium is different and all these things, but the values are in the middle. So those underlying insidious things that suggest parasport is not that big of a thing or whatever it is. What is it people are assuming, but also why don't we prioritize? What is that? What's that about? Why aren't we valuing parasport in the same way we do all these other opportunities? Two questions.
I'm gonna toot Laura's horn a little bit here in that, I think a lot of the work that she's doing on legacy of games, whether it's the Pan American Games or the Commonwealth Games, and the research that she's doing is trying to address exactly that, because I think people will be like, it's not really gonna do anything, but that's not true. And so what are the impacts? How do games act as a catalyst? Did you see how I used that word, by the way? That you
did? Well done.
Okay.
You've been learning.
I listen. How can games, how can programs act as a catalyst for other social change? And I think for too long, people just didn't think that the evidence was there or that the impact was there. And I think a lot of the work that Laura is doing is challenging that. And calling that into question. So I think that needs to continue. It needs to be demonstrated that there is impact, there is benefit, there's value.
There can be, right? There can be, because
Yeah.
we've seen studies, right, like 2012, and they thought there'd be this huge, surge in participation and actually, or an embracing of the values of Olympism, and then it didn't really. But why?
Yeah.
Like,
I
it's not
think
like
it's a
it's not a
yeah.
panacea. It doesn't just
No,
happen.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
What needs to be in place for
Right.
it?
That's the critical question. And that's what we're trying to get at is what needs to be in place. What do we need to do to catalyze that, to make sure that we do see that social change happen? And we don't expect that just bringing the big circus to town is going to change everything, because it's not. In fact, there's lots more negatives than there are positives. So how do we use that opportunity to create these potential and these positive outcomes? And I think, the example is really good here in the province of Ontario after the 2015 games, and the Ontario Parasport Collective continues to work together. Here we are, 2023, and that group, for all its challenges, continues to work as a group of provincial parasport organizations, creating new opportunities for participation, pathways to participation, pathways to coaching, educational opportunities. They're piloting the university recreation programming. So these are the kinds of things that can get catalyzed through games. And so that's the stuff that I'm really fascinated and interested in, and how can we do more of that? Right? Nobody's going to stand up and say, we're never going to have games again. Well, guess what? We're there. Everybody loves the games. Okay. So put all that negative aside and say, given that, what are we going to do to create some really cool and really great opportunities for social change and to get people equitably participating in sport? And so that's where I think we can use those unique resources and funds that come in and knowledge resources from people that have been through these games before to create new opportunities. So, but we're really interested in moving forward and looking at, okay, so how do we do that and get rid of that institutionalized ableism? Well, how do we overcome some of those things that are already embedded in the system of a games and the sports system to make sure that it is done in an equitable way moving forward?
Mhm.
Is the 2015 Para Collective model, has that been replicated? The 2023 games are going on right now. Is there that push to, hey, you could do something similar? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but building out this collective is a great.
Sure. I mean, David probably can talk about it from the Alberta group, because I think that was really, I came and spoke at their workshops and conferences early on when they were trying to form sort of the Alberta Collective, and that's gone really well. I've spoke at places around the world. I was in Paris recently, talking to them about the creation of a sort of a collective organizations coming together to work together. So really building across inter-organizational relationships, that's the key piece, because, we all think in the sports sector that everybody works together, but you'd be so fascinated by the fact that when you say, well, do you work with that organization? They're like, the who? I've never heard of them before, even though they have really parallel missions. And so, creating opportunities that they can connect and figure out where there is a space for overlap of opportunity and creative new programs and innovation. I think that's the piece that's been really innovative with some of this stuff. So I think it's tried to be done in different places with different levels of success, for sure. This is the only one I know of that's been catalyzed in this way and then been sort of sustained over the long term. You can look to Vancouver 2010 and, the legacy organization that became Lift Philanthropy, but that was much bigger. That wasn't focused just on parasport. That was a much broader perspective on social innovation. So that's the one I know of. David, you might have more insight there.
Well, I think, from the Vancouver exemplar, I think the Whistler adapted.
That's true. Yeah.
Evolved a little. I think it existed before that, but I think it was enabled by it. The Canada Games, which were in Niagara last summer, again, the Niagara Penguins is an organization that existed way before the games came, but I think it was enabled and supported by the games, and it allowed kind of adapted sport in a Niagara regional perspective to grow. The Parapan American Games, in addition to the Ontario kind of collective, I mean, the Ability Center in Oshawa or Whitby.
Ability Center.
Again, was
I get them both mixed up. Which one's where? Yeah.
It was built prior to the Pan American Games, but it was certainly used fully during those games and got some notoriety as a result of it. I think there's who knows what's going to happen with the Canada Games, Winter Games taking place in PEI. Maybe there's a maritime collective that evolves out of this. In Red Deer, which hosted the most recent Winter Games for the Canada Games, there's a small collective there that again evolved and connects and works with one another in a really, and in a very micro way. So there are examples of it. The University of Alberta, where Laura and I both did our PhDs, they hosted the 68 first national wheelchair games that led to Canada ultimately participating in the first Paralympic Games that they attended in Israel. And that has created a nexus of adapted physical activity at the U of A since. Like, it continues to be a leader in that area. And then, and so, if you were to, this is maybe a bit of a distal connection, but then you think, okay, Laura did her PhD there, and then she ended up at Western, and now Western is, I would argue, one of the hubs of adaptive physical activity nationally. And so, the influence that it has on people and leaders and where they go. So, I think games do have a catalytic impact. It's just sometimes hard to track the cause and effect.
And I'd love to dig into that. But first, I want to circle back to that idea of the interorganizational. So you're talking about the person traveling, and I mean, I'm in communication, so I'm immediately attracted to this idea of, what channels, what exchange opportunities, what forms are being created, what connections, who are the hubs, right? You're obviously both having sparks come off of you all the time around these topics. So that's inspiring people as well. What else has worked to get people talking, building, working together? What are you noticing? Like, and Alberta's come up, U of A, and actually they're so interesting to me because they're the ones who tried flipping the game times for women's basketball and men's basketball, right? And finding out that, it didn't matter, because that's always the argument. Well, the men bring in the box office, so we let the women play during dinner, and then people wander in halfway to watch the real game, and they flipped it, and it was fine. It had
make any difference. No, exactly. Yeah, everything was good. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's interesting because, as David said, sometimes the universities can be a catalyst for this work because you have, for lack of a better word, critics like us standing there saying, this is not okay. Let's try this model differently. Let's change it. And we know it can work differently. And so, that's where you see places like the University of Alberta and, Calgary. There's lots of opportunities there where people have really pushed it, who have been vocal enough to say, let's not just do it the same way as we've always done it. Let's try something new and different and see what happens with it. And I think it's also in that we're okay. Academics are really good at trying out new things and not worrying so much about it doesn't work, because we think even a bad result is a good result, right?
Right.
We get data from that. So I think we're sometimes more, maybe less risk averse because we'll think, we'll just try it. If it doesn't work, then we can study why it didn't work. It's just kind of a cool way to innovate on things. So that might be why you've seen some of that. And so you see that, UBC is a good example where there is the Parasport hub there too. And, in Alberta and somewhat in Ontario, PEI will be an interesting one. I think there's some real, movers and shakers in the Parasport community out there that are going to really drive from those games. So we'll have to see what happens. So I would say the next piece of that is, I go back to our very initial conversation, Jennifer, is champions like David, and making sure you continue to cultivate champions in this space is so fundamental to moving it forward.
Well, and I love your point about that tolerance for failure, which we learn from sport too, right? That it's always a good thing. We're going to learn something. And I think that's a really cool factor to tease out here. And the critical eyes, right? The people that are in there. So maybe it isn't about raging so much as being assertive and critical, right? The light diplomatic critics. Okay. And I
would say, to be fair, Jennifer, I think to a certain extent, it's the type of researcher that I know David says he's not a researcher, but we both are more practical academics, right? We look at research for change, not just to break down the walls, not just to break out a system down totally, but actually what can we do to create change? So it's being critical and then looking for solutions to move it forward. Again, we do, both of us, I think, I can speak on David's behalf on this, do get a little bit upset about the just constant critique with no direction forward, right? Whereas him and I really have said in all the work that we've done together, it's about, okay, let's be critical of this, but let's also find how we might move something forward, something new, different. That's a really important piece. Yeah. Maybe that's our background. See, you've heard that our path is the same. So, obviously we have to do things alike.
And to understand so that we can then solve and move forward and build something better. I love it too, probably action researchers, all of us. And I do think it is so crucial to have that, the link. Okay, you're teasing out and the champions, we can talk more about that, but also measures of impact. Like, how do we know, what are the factors, but how do we know it's working? How do we know these events are having that kind of impact? What do you pay attention to? You identified, well, they're catalyzing collectives and connections.
Yeah. This is a difficult one, David, if you think about this, because the parasport space is so unique. If we think about direct impact, you know, governments, even our universities, they all want to know about the numbers, and they want to know, you know, so they measure things in that way. And for us in this space, you know, there isn't massive numbers, but that's okay. Getting one more person involved in it, from our perspective, is great if they're getting quality participation, quality involvement. So I think it's more about, and I mean, we've tried to measure different things, you know, social capital levels, connectedness, belongingness, individual experiences of participating. Those things that are more qualitative in nature are so important to really understanding this space. It's not just about the numbers of people involved in participating.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's complicated. But I guess that's why we have jobs as researchers, is to try to uncomplicate these things and try to discern all these interrelationships. I mean, there's, you know, maybe a few examples, you know, levels of employment, and whether or not that increases for persons with impairment. I think, you know, that was one of the metrics that we looked at with the 2014 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. You know, things like, so when the Paralympics were held in Korea in Seoul in 1988, again, I haven't seen the specifics, so I'm speaking a little off the cuff here. I seem to recall there being recognition that the census that was done prior to the games, as far as people self-declaring their disability, that rose dramatically following the games. And so the census that took place the year after the games, the number of people that self-declared as having an impairment was way higher than it was prior to the games. And so people, you know, extrapolate from that perhaps the games had an impact whereby people felt a sense of pride or recognition that, yeah, I do have an impairment, and that's good, that's okay. As opposed to it, you know, being hidden or pushed to the side previous. Again, I don't have the evidence to support necessarily that supposition. You could probably make the argument that, you know, the London 2012 games has its detractors, but I don't know, maybe the number of persons with impairment that are on television now in London on regular sport channels, and the regularity of showing Paralympic sport on TV. Again, I don't have the evidence to support this, but my guess is that it's increased dramatically compared to prior to the games. And so there has been an impact, in that it's at least demonstrated to television producers that showcasing Paralympic sport on TV is a good option. And so, and then who knows what impact that then has. And so, you know, the specific measurements are hard. You know, going back to Laura's comment about the numbers thing, but you're seeing, so Jumpstart, Canadian Tire Jumpstart, as a charitable organization, they've changed the way that they measure success in some respects, I think, because they've recognized exactly what Laura mentioned. And so kudos to them. And again, they support the organization that I manage here in Calgary, so it might sound somewhat being a sycophant, but to me, that's an example where a significant foundation on national context has adapted and updated the way that they support organizations, because of, I just think it was something they just didn't really think about. I don't think it was nefarious. It was just, you're right, that we need to think about how we measure impact in a disability context as opposed to an able-bodied context, because they are subtly different. Maybe not subtly, there's different.
Beautiful theme weaving through our conversation here of that enlarging our understanding of what safe means, enlarging our understanding of what success really truly is, or how we fund organizations. I mean, wouldn't this be good to bring to on the podium, where we're trying to expand our measures of success beyond a little hunk of something that isn't really in our control. Beautiful, good examples. And I think you're identifying the things we could be honing in on to measure: our ability to declare, our pride, the visibility, the excitement. Excellent.
Yeah.
What else? What else needs to? Let's keep digging in. to that, that base layer of those norms, what is it? Can we be truly call it out right now? Like, what is it that gets in the way of people, of those committees, those, big committees tackling this, of universities tackling parasport, of it being on, parasport being on TV just very naturally?
I mean, there's such bigger issues at play in my mind, because I think it comes to the fundamental flaw, I would argue, in our entire sports system, right? It's the cause of a lot of the safe sport issues we have, is that our system is built on medals and performance, and our funding models are built on medals and performance. And therefore, we don't value participation in the way that we should. We don't value that 5 more people are participating in a program. All the kids are participating in physical education in schools. Our funding models are fundamentally built on when we win medals, an organization gets more money. And that's the huge problem, because then we're going to push for success, and we're not going to push for more numbers. We're not going to push for more safety. We're not going to push for more healthy lifestyles. We're going to push to try and get a few people on the podium. And that's what matters. And that's what really holds back parasport too, because there are only smaller numbers to begin with. And then if we pare that down even more to just a few who are going to rise to the top and get on the podium, then how do we start to really fund and bring those resources to the rest of what's involved in sport and the rest of the opportunities that should be there for grassroots participation, recreational sport participation across the board, whether it's able-bodied or para? Now, in that mind, that's the fundamental thing that we really need to deal with in this country, is how do we actually resource sport across the board?
Why is performance so important? What is that about? What is a podium? If we've been in sport, you actually do learn it's meaningless. Like, you really don't even care. You don't know where your medals are, right? So when you actually go through the experience, you learn all the other beautiful things. What is it? What is this fixation on performance? What do you think?
Well, I think there is actually quite an irony in that, to your exact point, is like, I played football at McMaster for 4 years. We were terrible. Never made the playoffs. And just online on the weekend, we had this email exchange going with some of the guys that I played with back in the 80s. And we were just having a great time, connecting with each other and seeing how we were doing and talking about our kids and our families and all. Like, it was awesome. And we didn't care whether we were terrible. That didn't enter the conversation. Right. But yet formally we come back to that constantly over and over again. But I think if you really were to ask people, they'd be like,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's historical in many respects. We saw that happen in the 60s and 70s in particular. Even you look back to the policies that were happening, it moved towards being about the political face, right? It looked where we were at on the international scene. That was sort of the face that Canada had on the international scene, was when we stood atop a podium, somehow we look good, and it's this political tool that's being used. And because that became sort of the rhetoric, and then we're going to host a game, so we got to look good for those games. And then we're going to host another games 12 years later, so we do these things that kind of push this agenda. And then we moved our whole funding model in that direction, and have never really thought about, is that what we should be valuing? Yeah. Is that what we really want to be doing? And so, in some respects, it's awful that we're in this sort of crisis in sport right now in many respects, but maybe it's an opportunity for us to step back and say, hold on a second, let's talk about what we really value in terms of sport participation, opportunities for participation, healthy lifestyles, and what sport really offers to all of us, right? It's the same, David, you say that about football. I mean, my kid said to me one day, pulls out this box, and, Mom, what's in this box? Why is it so heavy? As you said, Jennifer, oh, that's all my medals. They're in a box in the basement. I think they were in a flood. Again, that's not what I remember about that time. That's not why I continue to be an adult ski racer right now. I'm not trying to get on the top of the podium. Man, I have a lot of fun. It's great. It's great people. It's connecting. It's all those things that we get from it. So why are our funding models still built on something that's not really maybe what we all value?
Yeah.
And keep going, because this nationalism has come up quite a bit in the conversation I'm having with people, where I try to dig in, what is it? why do we have to look at what's with the medal table? How does it have any relevance to anything that, we're here on the medal table? It's all population based and resourcing and values, it just doesn't even have any relevance, but we cling to it.
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk about both sides of my mouth here, because I do like watching high performance sport, and I do like cheering for teams. And I revel in that. But at the end of the day, if they don't win, it doesn't, like, the sun still comes up the next day, and then life goes on. I remember where I was in a few instances watching certain teams perform, and if they won in particular, it was very exciting. And so I enjoy that. I really like that part, and it's allowed me to connect with my own kids in some respects, if we cheer for the same team or we cheer for the same organization or something like that. So I don't want you to think that I'm anti sport, or I'm anti high performance sport, but I think the pendulum has swung so far where that's all we focus on, that it's then been to the detriment, I think, of the whole. I don't think they're binary. I don't think I think you can still have both. High performance sport culture where you're trying to win and you want to win the gold. Like, I think that's good, but not at the expense of all these other terrible things that that people just think needs to be part of that system. Right. And this whole conversation about safe sport, I think, is based again on all kinds of myths and stereotypes of what people thought should and could lead to high performance success. And I'm like, I'm not really sure any of that's true.
Right. That's true.
Yeah, no, I agree, David. I think the issue is that as soon as you bring this up and start to talk about the idea that we're too focused on medals, people think that means you have to swing the pendulum totally back the other direction. And that means you hate high performance sport and it's not possible. No, that's not actually what we're saying at all. Is that, in fact, there can be really great, wonderful high performance systems that we can try and talk about success and value success in different ways. But what we've done is forgotten to value the rest of the system. Equally more, however we want to look at it, which means valuing it, means resourcing it as well, right? We all, we could talk about it from a health perspective. We know Canadians, like many people around the world, are not as healthy as they should be. They're not moving enough. Well, why not? Because we don't value it. We're not putting any resources into really supporting fun, safe, healthy environments to have people participate in sport. And actually, we know from our Scandinavian partners around the world, if we valued more broad-based participation, we actually would be more successful in the high performance realm. Instead of trying to cherry pick from all these places where there's few people participating and hope that we get someone on the podium. That's really a critical issue.
Yes, right. I love it. Both. We can have both. And maybe that's part of it too, helping our world understand that both can coexist. And actually are interdependent. But I find in sport right now too, they are being kind of falsely framed in competition. Hey, I see it in so many NSOs even, that it's the clubs against the high performance. It's crazy. And so how do we almost need to divide them further to create a sense of self, and then they can start to work in concert with one another again.
But I would say one of the challenges, and maybe David can speak a bit to this, and if you talk about parasport again, is that there is this presumption that parasport is Paralympic sport, right? It is medals and medal performances. And when someone starts, that's where they're going. Right. And so that's really a concerning issue that we need to manage and consistently deal with, because participation across the board in parasport is important. Doesn't mean people are automatically going to the Paralympic Games, but because we sensationalize and celebrate those stories of someone who, started this year and wow, 2 years later, they're on the podium at the Paralympic Games. It's often problematic for the development of parasport overall, because that's not really the goal of why David runs his programs, right? We're trying to get people participating and enjoying themselves and connected. And maybe one might eventually go off in that direction, and that's great, but that's not the goal of what this really is fundamentally about.
Yeah, and that doesn't equate to success. So by having an athlete go through the system and become a Paralympic champ, like, that doesn't necessarily mean that the system was successful. Just by the same token, that if you don't have an athlete that gets to, like, that's a failure, because that's not necessarily the point of the system. But I think we've made that assumption. That's how it's supposed to play out, and that's why we've created it and set it up.
That's why we have to own the podium, right?
Gotta own it. I've had kids say to me, well, I don't think I should row because neither of my parents are Olympians. We have a lot of rowing Olympians here, right?
Oh, yeah.
We've destroyed it. We've just, it has become the goal, and it's
Right.
corrupting everything. It's crazy. So what is the goal of sport? What is the goal of sport? What's the point?
One of the programs that we host at Mount Royal is called CAPA, Children's Adapted Physical Activity. And it's where we bring in children with impairments kind of between the ages of about 8 to 14. And we partner them up with one of our students one-on-one. They spend an hour in the gym working on any number of physical activity things, catching, throwing, running, jumping, etc. And then we spend an hour in the pool. Anyways, we always ask the parents, like, what are the specific things that your kids can work on insofar as, a fundamental motor skill or physical literacy? Like, what kind of things do you think that they could use some assistance with and work on? And like, inevitably, the vast majority of them just say, we just want them to have fun, and we just want them to meet another kid.
Yep.
Make a friend. That's it.
Yeah.
They learn how to catch, great. But that's not the priority. The priority is for our kids to have an enjoyable experience, to enjoy themselves, and to make a friend.
Yeah.
I think it's as simple as that. And I think we really complicate it.
We'd overcomplicate it because we have to meet these funding priorities and we have to do these things, and right, instead of like, at the end of the day, that's the question. I mean, I'm the president of our local little ski racing program in London. I know people will watch this laugh. We do have one. It's like a little bump, barely even exists. So very accessible program, lots of opportunities. And yesterday was the last day, and I said to every single kid, did you have fun? Yes. Did you learn something? Yes. Awesome. I can't wait to see you back again. I don't care where they finished in the rankings. None of them care either. They just had a great time. They met some people. They were all going off together to have a good time. So, that really is what this should be about. But I understand from an organization's perspective and a government perspective that is funding us, how do we measure? They want measure of that. How do we, resource all of this fun they're having? So
well, and that's the crux, isn't it? Right. And there, it is possible, like you've already described, these qualities, these social capital elements that we can, if we work on it, can actually capture to bring additional measures, mental health and connectedness and fundamentally, even I think about, when you do have a success as a team, it is more about that shared experience than it is someone, being on the podium, blah, blah, blah. Even the hearing the anthem is more about community and connectedness
yes,
to the country than it is about, I don't know, pride, some sort of nationalism. And even I was thinking when David was talking about those, oh God, I'm addicted to sport. And that Crosby goal in Vancouver, right? I mean, everybody remembers. And I remember thinking, we're hooped if we lose this. As a country, we're going to be depressed. It's going to be a problem. We really need to figure this out.
Okay, but you know what? I think so. But I think that's a good example. Because when you talked about that Crosby goal, I immediately remembered where I was, because it was at a neighbor's house, a couple streets down. We were in the basement. We were with friends. All my kids were there. All their kids were there. And it was this euphoric celebration amongst friends. When I was able to take two of my kids and my wife to the Flames played in the playoffs last year. And it was Game 7 against Dallas Stars, and Calgary won in overtime. We lost the series after that to Edmonton. Calgary lost the series to Edmonton after that. And again, the sun comes up, the world goes on. But I still remember that Game 7 and being with my wife and my two kind of young adult sons, and us jumping up and down, just like doing this and shaking and hugging, and beers flying all over the place, and just so excited. But that's what I remember is my shared experience with them.
Right.
Like, again, it wasn't the win necessarily. It was just the shared euphoria with them. That is what I recall and what I so value. And what I embrace.
Well, it's so important, Dave. I mean, theoretically, that's called the spaces of liminality, where we do have the opportunity to connect with other people around these shared experiences, and sport helps provide that. And so they are important. So again, go back to the big event stuff where people go, oh, they're terrible and they're awful. Actually, Yeah, but they also provide these wonderful opportunities to connect with others and to share experiences and memories and create those things. And that's really important for all of us because it's important for our happiness and our well-being and our mental health and all of those great things. So there are these good outcomes that can come from it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The liminal experience is that's a beautiful concept, and perhaps just elevating, helping people recognize this is what is actually happening for you. It's not nationalistic pride, and it's not a sense of I'm the best in the world. It's this liminal shared experience. Beautiful.
Yeah.
But I remember learning that competition is collaborative when being on the start line, and we trained a lot with the US girls. They became our sisters, so part of it is that, but we train with lots of different countries to get that connection going. But I remember someone saying, well, we think, Cheryl's ill in that boat we're racing. And I remember really feeling worried about her and worried about this isn't going to be very good then. Like, I really want us to have a good race together, and it hitting me that, I think I've got it. I think I've figured out what sport's all about right now. Yeah. We're in it together. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. So much that we as people in this space can elevate and promote and help people understand. What else do you want to talk about? My final question is, like, if you had a magic wand, what would you change in sport in Canada right now? We've talked about changing measures, changing the focus, expanding it. How would you articulate that? What kind of shifts would you make if you could do whatever you want?
I thought about this one because I knew you were going to ask this question. And I think it does go back to the funding model that we're set on, and that we have an organization that's called Own the Podium, which is the basis of funding for a lot of high performance sport in this country. And so it just says to the rest of us, well, it doesn't matter whether you participate if you're not getting on the podium. That's the only thing that matters. And so if we could break down that structure and fund sport and resource sport in a different way, for me, that would be the key piece of it. And to do that, that's going to require a really different model. I mean, David and I work in the space of parasport, and I think, we train coaches in this country is a prime example of that. We don't train them in parasport. That's an optional module. No. Everyone should be trained in all of those things, and all about parasport and about the fun aspects. And that's what that should all be about. So let's put some resources into making sure more people can be participating and having fun, welcoming experiences, and not focus only on that podium experience. So that would be my big piece to it.
Funding, education, and that's investing, that's valuing, right? Okay. And what about you, David? What would you change or do?
I think similar to what Laura was talking about. I think putting more teeth behind the funding that's given, insofar as you need to do this. The challenge, I mean, again, I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth here. NSOs will come back and say, we don't have the capacity to do all this. I don't know, is that an excuse? Is it real? It probably leans more towards excuse. And so the system, if I could just redo the whole system from scratch, I think that would be much easier, but that's not going to happen. So we have to try to adapt and change what we currently have.
Why isn't it going to happen?
Well, like the connection between the national sport organization, the provincial sport organization, and a civic grassroots sport organization is disjointed. And, if we were to look at the parasport system, some provinces do better jobs than others. Like there's no consistency from one jurisdiction to the next insofar as how things get run and how things get managed. I mean, alpine skiing, Laura was talking about her local ski club. I mean, that's as good example as any. I mean, if you were to look at how alpine skiing includes people with impairments, you'd probably come up with 50 different examples. And so that lack of consistency makes it tough to kind of build on an economies of scale. There's lots of great stuff happening, but whether or not, they could learn from each other. And, Jennifer, you talked about this earlier about people not knowing each other, not connecting with each other. We're terrible in that respect. And so, I just kind of throw out the alpine example as one, and I don't really even know what I'm talking about because I don't know that system that well, but I suspect if we actually dug deep, we could probably find, again, 40 to 50 different exemplars nationally of doing adapted skiing but they don't connect with one another, and they don't build on economies of scale, and there's no system where they communicate with each other. And so again, if I could wave a magic wand, that might be what it is.
It's our country, right? We are so diverse. So
Right.
we need the diversity, but we also need some efficiencies. And so we're all spread out and doing all these different things, but there's such redundancy. So these economies of scale are the reason to find some kind of connection. And then what are the consistent principles maybe governing some of these things? Like we have to tolerate the diversity, but it would be lovely if I think connection really seems to be the key for Canada. What's getting in the way? Why won't we talk to each other? What's preventing us from connecting more?
David's going to be so kind about it, I can tell. There are so many egos in sport, egos everywhere. And that's, people who did sport go into administrating sport, and they take that philosophy with them, and that all the way through, right? And as you said it, David, before, about we kind of went through the system of when people thought this is the only way how you get people on the podium. You have to train them this way, and you have to do that. Well, those people are now still coaching, they're still administrating, they're right. So you've got this culture within the system of people that are kind of perpetuate these ideas, and those egos continue to be perpetuated. I know best, so my way is the best way. I think the egos is the biggest challenge, and I don't know how you ever change that, because it's a bit of human nature. It's a bit of, I don't know what it is, but I think that's and it's not, I wouldn't say it's exclusive to sport. It's certainly everywhere in every industry, but I see it a lot in sport.
I think ego is a big barrier to that. I think a lot of it is just, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And we all have, various relationships that we have to put the time and the energy in to be better at communicating with one another, whether it's our partner, our kids, our students, our peers. Like, Jennifer, how is it that it's taken this long for you and I to talk to one another?
Right.
Right. I mean,
talking you, but yeah.
Like how, like,
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean,
time and energy and work.
Yeah.
And, so much of sport is volunteer led, and we continue to expect it to be done that way.
Right.
And if we expect it to be done that way, then people are always going to have competing priorities, and, it's going to take a long time to get stuff done. So.
Right. And we kicked off by talking about, wouldn't it be wonderful to have more of these kind of opportunities, those forums where we can all connect and meet each other and work together and solve problems. And
listen, I was really grateful that you asked Laura and I to speak at the same, because I don't get that chance to talk to Laura that often. As much as I really enjoy our time together. I always value her input. She's a confidant, she's a mentor to me, and yet we would just we get these short little bursts of emails back and forth to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
We're trying to answer very specific questions, but we don't actually talk to one another about, and I'm really looking forward to you coming out, because I get to say, how are your kids? What's going on with your husband, Gord? Tell me more about what's going on as, the head of your department of Western. We just don't do that enough. We're such a hurry and busy.
But like you say, I think it all drills back down to what we value and where the value is, where the resources, time as a resource as well, space, those forums. If it's always off the side of our desk, it's always the volunteer, then there are the competing priorities. And then there's also the competition for resources, which makes the egos flare up a little bit as well, or even just protectionism.
Yeah.
They might, I can't talk to them. They might take what we have or whatever. Yeah. Okay. And I am hearing rumors that a new model is on the horizon.
So is the Canadian sport policy going to be released? Is that what you're making?
I hear rumors of that as well, but
I thought it was supposed to have been released at the start of the Canada Games, but I have not seen or heard anything. But
well, I think with all of these more recent huge scandals, that it's probably being talked about a little more deeply. I think there may have been a kind of a less dramatic shift. And then the funding model, it's got to change. Yeah. What's the reluctance there? To change? Why wouldn't we just change the name as an artifact? What's going on? I don't think people change.
People don't like change. We know that.
I've had the same hairstyle for 20
Well, I
years
just
now.
think I think about it because David used to be the director of his department as well, and I remember when you got out of that and said, I'm not doing that anymore. And I honestly think, you know, you and I had that conversation about part of it is you want to change things because things need to change. People don't want to change. They don't like to change. They don't want to do things differently. It's much easier to just continue on the way you've been doing it. It's less work, it's less hassle, it's, you know, all the things that come along with it. So I really think that that reluctance to change is such a fundamental piece in organizations, for people. That's why I don't think we're seeing that happen. And I think the other thing is that as much as I said that we might be a little less risk averse, I think that sport and sport organizations are extremely risk averse. Like, I don't want to change it because I don't know if it's the right approach yet.
Right.
So I think they're trying so hard to get it right that they're not willing to make the change. When in fact, we probably just need to try something new and be okay if it doesn't work, and let's try something different, right? So, yeah.
But again, so few resources. We worry about risking what we have. Oh, my.
Exactly.
Work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and you know, listen, I mean, as education, like as educators, we're probably not great. Like, we've been teaching, like the model of education is not really evolved.
Yeah. We shouldn't talk about that as universities, right? We're pretty.
We have a semester that starts September, it goes to
Yeah.
December. We have 3 lectures a week. We have 2 midterms and a final exam. Like is this really the best model? Is this?
It's fascinating because I'm in this very unique university that was born of, it was supposed to be entrepreneurial. I mean, it was supposed to be not funded whatsoever by government, which just turned out fairly impossible. But it's fascinating to watch. I've been there about 20 years now, watching it pull toward the norm. Because people come from other universities and then they try to pull it toward the norm because what they are familiar with. Yeah.
And Quest, I see Quest University just closed.
Yeah.
Or it's announced that they're going to close.
Oh, I didn't see.
They're not going to, and it was again supposed to be this,
right. Yeah.
you know, mic dropping, mind blowing new way to look at
New way of
education.
doing it. Yeah.
And it just couldn't work. And again, I just saw a headline, so I don't know any of this.
No, it's true. Yeah. Financially.
Yeah. We could have a whole other conversation about universities and education.
that's a bigger, we could be here for hours on that one.
On that note, okay, wonderful conversation with both of you, and really pulled out some important themes and exposed some important things we need to be talking about with real honesty and authenticity and courage, you know, and not just kind of talk over stuff, but pull it out. I've got some great students in a leadership program who are calling it out. And I find that I'm so excited about my next webinar, because it's going to be these young leaders who are not afraid to challenge the status quo. Might be the way forward. Thank you very much. And let's stay in touch. I'll keep working on this idea of the communication piece and connecting people and creating forums, and have a great visit, you two, in Calgary.
Wonderful. Yeah, we will.
All right. Thank you, and take care.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Bye.
Thanks, David. Good to see you.
You too.